If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this week was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 225 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, Jeff Dwoskin. Great to have you back for what's sure to be the cartooniest classic conversation of all time. My guest today is Bob Eckstein, award-winning writer, illustrator, New Yorker cartoonist, and world's leading snowman expert. You heard me right. World's leading snowman expert. We're talking the history of snowmen. We're talking cartoons. We're talking comedy. This conversation is amazing. Honored to have one of the top humorists in the world with me to talk shop. And that's coming up in just a few seconds. And in these few seconds, I hope it's a reflection on the time you spent with episode 224, Lydia Cornell. Amazing conversation with Lydia, of course, the star of Too Close for Comfort, Sarah Rush, and she's been in so much more. Great conversation. Definitely check that out after your heart becomes full with all the snowman knowledge in the world. Bob Eckstein, it's a great one, and it's coming up right now. All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce my next guest, world famous cartoonist, New York Times best-selling author, snowman expert, host of the popular podcast, The Cartoon Pad. You've seen my guest cartoons in Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, The New Yorker, Playboy, and a million other places. Welcome to the show, Bob Eckstein.
Jeff, it's great to be here. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful.
I have been enjoying your work and your books and the work of others that you share in your books as well. It's such an interesting profession to me to be a professional humorist and cartoonist. How did you find this path in life?
You know, everything was by accident. And you said profession. I never even considered it a profession. I guess I felt like I've been chasing paychecks. The jobs are also different. I started out when I was a teenager. I had my first job. I was hired to work at a golf course, and I had to show up at the tee time around 5:30 a.m. And I went down there, and the group of people who were ready to tee off were joking around, and I was making them laugh. And I had this group of people who were my audience. And shortly afterwards, this golf cart came racing down from the clubhouse. And it was the owner of the golf course. And in front of everyone, he accused me of being on drugs and fired me in front of this group of people. And I promised myself then that I would never have a regular job after that. And I never really did. I went from there to going to art school. I never finished high school. I just kind of started going to art college. And when I graduated, I was asked to join the faculty. So I've been teaching since I went to college, and that's over 40 years. So it's a long time I've been teaching. I've been doing writing and doing illustration and doing other odds and ends. And somewhere along the line, I started doing cartoons. It was on a dare. And that was something that happened when a friend of mine, who I'm going to be seeing soon, Sam Gross, he's like the world's greatest living cartoonist. He kind of took me under his wing and on a dare asked me to submit to the New Yorker. And I put together some cartoons, and the New Yorker bought the first cartoon that I drew. And from there, I got into that other world. And I've been meeting people who I admire and getting involved in projects through friendships and trying to befriend people who I really admire.
That's amazing. I have a question for you. Cartoon question for you. When you say cartoons, we're not talking about strips, right? We're talking about single panel cartoons for the most part.
Right. There's like little definitions, but I don't think in terms of one being so different than the other. Usually it's just a story I'm trying to tell. So before I even did any cartoons, it was still a story I was trying to tell. But in that time, I only knew how to tell it in my writing or maybe graphically with a illustration. So now it's kind of grown into doing single gag cartoons, but still, it doesn't have to be. For instance, today I was doing a piece for the New Yorker that's going to appear on the full page, and it's multi-paneled. And I really don't divide it up. It's still just an idea. It's just trying to come up with something that's going to make people laugh and think in a different way, see things in a different way. And at some point, I had to make a decision on what's the best form for that. Should it just be a written piece? Could it be a piece that's sort of encapsulated in a single panel? Or does it need a multi-panel?
I've been fascinated with single panel. Far Side is what kind of got me for the most part. I think those cartoons and Gary Larson, like when I was younger.
Yeah.
And like I was always fascinated. So what are the steps? Like if you were to say that these are the what's the word I'm looking for? These are sort of the bullet points to the perfect one panel, where you're like, you have to, right? Because like I guess what I'm asking is like if someone looks at your cartoon and they go, oh, I don't get it. And then you point to the banana or whatever, right? And you go, oh, I get it now, right? You said this and it was that. Is there sort of like guidelines that when someone looks at something like to be a successful one panel, because there's a brilliance to it, right?
Jeff, it sounds like you want to be a gag cartoonist. If there's no master class and there isn't any set rules, the way to get from point A to B is different depending on each person. And actually, everyone's different way of getting to point A to B is going to be different. And that's what makes their cartoons or their voice unique. But there are some general things to know. And you brought it up yourself just now when you said, is there any type of rules?
I'm coming at it from the idea of like, I'm a comedian. So if I write a joke, I have an idea of a structure to get where I want to go. And I know how I need the audience to react at a certain point. With multi-panel, you're kind of telling a story, but with a single panel, it's a one shot, right? It's a combination of that one moment. So I was just
yeah. Let me try to give you a good answer for this, and that's with your example of talking about having to explain the banana part, because that's a key component to making a successful gag cartoon. There's always exceptions to the rules, but what you just explained was that moment in which the viewer is engaged. So the viewer now all of a sudden has to be a part of the cartoon because they're having a eureka moment. A eureka moment meaning that there's a moment in which, in that very small thing that you're showing, a 10-second glance, that it took them to piece it together. It's almost a little bit like a puzzle. So it required their joke to be completed because they said, aha, now I understand the joke that you were coming to. Because if there isn't a eureka moment, the category then becomes a very corny type of cartoon or a word pun or something that's so obvious that there's no real satisfaction and there's no eureka moment. So you want something that's a sort of a sweet spot. If you make it too much of a puzzle and too much time elapses in that cartoon for them to understand it, then you've lost your audience. Person gets actually subconsciously frustrated and a joke goes over their head in the same way that you were performing on stage. If you did a joke that you felt was a little bit out of left field, you're going to lose your audience. If you're doing a joke for the cartoon or for the stage, it's the same thing. The joke is that you're kind of going into a familiar ground. You're doing something that you think everyone in the room could be familiar with. You're not too specific that you are keeping some people out of the joke. It's not too inside baseball, but then also you're not insulting their intelligence. And by doing something that's just a plain obvious joke. So there is a sweet spot of saying they're going to be involved in that eureka moment. And I have cartoons that really tried to do that. And that's just one rule. And just saying this, I could think of the other rules kind of I do subconsciously when I make a cartoon because it kind of spills out of my head as I'm talking about it. But that covers the first one and the most important probably.
So do you have, I'm just relating this to stand-up. So do you have the same kind of, does this play out for you ever? Where you're like, you present a cartoon that you thought was the most brilliantly funny thing. And they just look at you and they're like, yeah, Bob, we don't get this at all. And then the one that you thought was okay, they're like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. We need more of these.
Okay, well, you're talking about is a humor subjective? And I have to tell you, it is to a certain extent, but there are such a thing as a good cartoon and a bad cartoon. There is such a thing as people being wrong and people being right. There are no cartoons I've done that I feel like no one's appreciated and it's a good cartoon. Those cartoons are appreciated. Maybe the wrong person I'm showing it to who has no experience in comedy, or you have a person who, in some cases, is a cartoon editor or humor editor, and they don't know. They're bad. They're notoriously known for not having a good sense of humor. And that's a different case, though, what you're talking about. And when you said it's different on stage. It actually isn't. We are really talking about the same thing as I approach how to write a joke. For my birthday, I'm going to be speaking at a college. On the entertainment for a banquet, going to be 1,500 people. I'm doing an hour stand-up. The way I'm going to approach is the same way. Are these jokes accessible? Are the jokes something that initially the setup is going to make people feel like they're along for the ride and they're confident to go along with me, but at the same time, give as little information as possible. As you know, if you had a longer setup, unless you're Norm Macdonald and that's part of the joke and you have a technique, you really want to get to point A and B in the shortest distance and make that time lapse be as short as possible. Now, you do that either standing up with the proper words for your setup, or in a cartoon, you provide only the information you think is needed to relay the joke. So enough for me to be guilty of a bad setup would be adding information in a drawing that we don't need. I'm not trying to make you laugh. I'm just trying to get you to focus on the points. And that's because everything else is going to water it down. So if I could keep it simple as could be, there's a lot of cartoonists who have a great gift of doing that. An example is Ed Steed. He's a New Yorker cartoonist who's very simplified. He doesn't add elements in the scene not necessary to the joke.
Awesome. All right. Very cool. Do you remember what your first published cartoon was or first published joke?
I do remember the New Yorker cartoon, of course. The first joke, you have to give me a break here, is my first joke. So it's not my strongest, but it was a guy on stage, ironically enough. It was a poet, and it was hecklers on poetry night. And in the audience, people were screaming out to this poor poet things like, you call that a metaphor, or things like that. And there was all these different insults that would be perfect for a poet on stage, hecklers.
That's funny.
I don't recall the other insults, but you kind of get the gist of it, and you could come up, if you don't right now, I'm sure. It kind of lends itself to everyone jumping in and thinking of a good insult for a poet.
Bob, when you write all the books that you've written, and you've written quite a few, where did these ideas come from? Focusing on cats and cat names.
A lot of times the book ideas come from imagining going into the store and what would I want to buy that's not there? Is there a book somewhere that is not there that I think, but of course it has to have an interest to myself too. If you could just humor me for a second, I'll tell you how, for instance, I came up with my first book, The History of the Snowman. Walked into Barnes and Nobles and I thought to myself, what's a good holiday book that's not here? And I thought to myself, well, there's no books that's not religious. Everything was denominational. What's a good non-denominational book that's meant for Jewish people, Catholic people, for anyone, but for the holidays? Now, I'm Catholic, so I've always grown up with Christmas, but I always felt like other people were excluded. So is there something that we could kind of do together? And then I said, well, there's no books about the history of snowmen as an art form. And it tied into another interest of mine, which is I've always loved Sherlock Holmes, and I thought it would be great to have a mystery, but not a crime mystery where someone's getting killed, but just one of life's great mysteries. I always say, like, who made the first joke or who made the first sandwich? That would be a great mystery, but no one did anything about the snowman. So it's there, but no one touched it yet. And I dove into it for that reason, because no one else had a book like that. And then I uncovered that the snowman had some good stories behind it and had a rich history that was there. And at that time, I felt like I had found a winning lottery ticket, that there was all these stories that could be told.
When you were kind enough to share all the books with me that you've done, or at least a good bunch of them, the first one I picked up was The Elements of Stress. I eyeballed the cat one, the complete book of cat names, and I saw the history of Snowman and the history of the snowman. And that one really caught my attention. I think that was one of the first things I said to you. Oh, can't wait to talk about snowmen with you. But I assumed, based on the other ones, that the Snowman was sort of a humorous joke book about the history of the snowman, especially after I read kind of the other ones. But no, the history of the snowman is a legit history of the snowman. It's fascinating how much detail and history that you found. And as a matter of fact, sometimes I try to do a little side research on the same topic, see what else I can come up with, bring maybe a new thing to the table. But no, every time I Googled, if something said, here's some 10 facts about snowmen, you were the source.
Oh, well, if I wasn't the source, it was because it was stolen. I just got sent a clip from Israel where they had a whole TV show and they never credited me, but they basically just lifted my whole book. And that happens a lot. And the way I got all the information is I took it on very seriously. I traveled around the world for 7 years, going to art institutes and speaking with professors of cultural history at different institutions around the world with a dream team. I have all these people who had helped me, including the guy who's in the new documentary that's very popular on Netflix, Clunk on Earth, is it?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you see,
She's hilarious. Yeah.
yeah, do you know the guy, Nigel Spivey?
I don't. I've just seen her. the host.
There's a really sexy guy on that she interviews on the episodes, and he's really great. And he helped me with the book. He's the world's leading archaeologist. With him and me, we went through the theory of, did prehistoric man make snowmen? And we had a whole panel of experts on the subject of prehistoric times, and we conjured up whether or not it was possible for snowmen to be made in that time. And that's all documented in the book. And the book came out again later as the illustrated history of the snowman, when I had more money to do it even more lush and make it more entertaining.
Sorry to interrupt this snowball-packed episode, but we have to take a quick break. I want to thank everyone for their support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations, and that's how we keep the lights on. And now back to my amazing conversation with Bob Eckstein. You want more Snowman? We got more Snowman coming at you right now.
The first book is a documentation of all my findings. And then I updated the book 10 years later and added all this lush artwork. And now it's being made into a movie where the script is being already finalized.
Oh, okay. So what is it? Is it like a National Treasure type movie?
Well,
what's the vibe of the movie? Like, and did you write the script, and like, how did you adapt it?
I wrote the script. I have a studio. It's not clear yet in what form it's going to take. And what we did was we tried to approach it in different ways to see what would be most wanted by the audience. One way is a David Attenborough parody. So it's a lot like Clunk on Earth, but it's always including humor. I always want to keep it real. The facts are there, but at the same time, that doesn't mean it has to be dry. It still can be served up in a humorous way. And I feel that way about everything. There's a lot of things that I do that are based on fact, but I'm always trying to add an element of humor to it.
Are you thinking documentary or like a movie?
It's going to be a documentary.
Okay.
It's going to be an hour. Will it be a TV special or streaming only is not clear yet. It's still being, discussed and stuff. And we'll have to just see what happens with that. But like you mentioned earlier, the element of stress, that book is based on facts that I thought would be helpful for people who were going through the pandemic and having a hard time. And even though I try to be funny in the book, and it's co-written with my buddy, Michael Shaw, who's one of the funniest people in the world. And that's my one skill, is I collect and I have as friends the funniest people in the world. My friends are all people who are considered the funniest people. But that book, when it came out, I heard from people in hospitals or people who were suicidal who said it literally saved their life, that book picked them up and got them through a very difficult time. And they actually applied some of the principles that we explained in the book. They handle stress.
It's a great book. Actually, I read it on the plane. I was flying somewhere and I kind of dove in and just moved right through it. It's easy to read. It's fun to read. And it's actually very useful. It covers some really good topics, but in a fun way that just makes you want to keep reading. Sometimes, a real book on stress, maybe.
No. This book is easy. It's short. And because it's short, it's thin enough that it's useful. If you have like a wobbly table, you're out with a couple at restaurant, you put it underneath the table to straighten it out. It also is very cheap. That's one thing I do about all my books is I make a point with my publisher to make an arrangement to make them affordable. Because more than anything else, I want people to read books. I want to encourage book buying. I try to help out bookstores. My one really successful book, Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. That book was a 2-time New York Times bestseller. And that book was to help out bookstores, but it was also very affordable. And we try to make it very accessible to people.
Can you go into that book?
I would love to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that book.
That book was just a pleasure to do. What I did was I went around and talked to people who were bookstore owners. I understood then like their plight. And I felt sorry for their situation, which is it's so hard right now to make a living selling books. It's hard to write books and to make a living, and it's hard to illustrate books. I've been on that end. And these bookstore owners and stuff, I thought this could be like a love letter to bookstores. And what I did was I collected stories from all the different people I met who had owned and ran a bookstore. And then I tried to glamorize their stores with these lush paintings I did. And for me, to get a chance to work like that, that's just a great opportunity. It goes back to the days when I was a painter and gives me an opportunity again to go back to a first love, which was painting. And I'm doing it now with a book called The Most Fascinating Museums. And I just went around for the last year going to museums, and now I'm painting the museums. But as for the bookstore book, I try to come up with unique experiences for the person who buys the book. This way they don't feel like they could just buy it like on Kindle or something. Instead, they want that tactile experience. And in the case of the bookstore book, it opens up uniquely like a garage door. The cover opens up the other direction, and then you turn the pages going the other way. And the whole experience is supposed to be sort of like a bucket list to encourage people to go to these bookstores. And I have little icons that introduce each of the bookstores that you check off if you visit them. And that's what's been happening the last 10 years or so. People share with me photographs from all around the world when they go to one of these bookstores. And it's almost like every other day, I got a photograph with someone posing with the bookstore they went to. And in one little small part, I feel like I'm helping out a situation for mom and pop shops that are really struggling with this big, I don't even want to say the word, but this online store that's kind of changing everyone.
Bob, that's awesome. And it is these online stores, as you say. It was funny. I just recently went to a record show, LP, vinyl show. I miss going to record stores or music stores. And I miss,
oh my God, yeah.
I miss going to Barnes and Noble. Everyone closed around me, and all the Borders and all that kind of stuff. Borders bookstores. There's something about just being surrounded by those things and discovering things.
Yeah. And Jeff, it was like so much more exciting too, listening to music when there was more components to it. I remember I grew up in like the 80s and the 90s, and I used to love punk and new wave and seeing how the album cover would look by my favorite groups. And you don't even have an album cover now. But that was something that was like part of the purchase, is so special as part of the experience.
Yeah, the art of the album was when you think of like Dark Side of the Moon or anything like that, it's just seared into your brain.
I got to share with you. I got myself an old LP player. I had one, of course, but I got a new one, old fashioned, but brand new. So I could go back and play my vinyls, and I had a whole stack. And I put on one of your recent guests, and I love your show. I've been listening to it, and I heard Dave Thomas and his LP. And I had the LP for the McKenzie brothers from Second City Television. And I was just playing that by coincidence. And I didn't know that you had him on as a guest when I was playing the LP. The two incidents just happened.
Oh, that's amazing. And thank you for listening. I appreciate it. I was excited because I've had Robert Klein on recently, and I was at a record store, and I bought almost every one of his albums. They were selling in perfect condition for $1 each. And I just I'll take them all. Thank you very much.
Robert Klein is the next door neighbor of a friend of mine who used to be my boss, Bob Mankoff. Bob Mankoff used to be the cartoon editor of The New Yorker. Robert Klein's his neighbor, and I met Robert Klein when I was doing the eulogy for my friend, my close friend, who was my writing partner. And Robert Klein is so kind. And it brought back memories listening to your episode, hearing his voice again, and reminder of his kindness. He came up to me at the funeral and said, "You killed." I had tried to make the audience laugh because they were made up mostly of comedians. In the first row was Gilbert Gottfried and other people who were laughing, and they weren't laughing because they thought I was funny. They were probably laughing because they were trying to be supportive, realizing my pain. And this was Len Belzer, who was the brother of Richard Belzer. And that's how I met Richard Belzer. And I've met other people in the business. I've been fortunate enough to be friends with my idols. Those people include people like Monty Python's Michael Palin and Larry Miller and all these other comedians who I've got a chance to know, sort of just branched out, as well as famous cartoonists. Michael Palin rhymes with Michael Maslin. Michael Maslin's my favorite cartoonist. Him and me are very close, great friends. He's helped me with my career. And I learned early on in my career, I need to create a support group. And that support group has taught me how to be funny, how to write, how to conduct myself, and just learn. And another example of this is who I consider our generation's greatest humorist, Jack Handey. And Jack Handey's been working with me, and I'm working with him in his next book. It's an honor, and it's a ride, and I never would have guessed this would happen, but it's my one skill is that I had a chance to learn from the best.
Oh my God. When you just said that, I mean, I remember the thing to me now about Saturday Night Live is that there's no repeats. Like they don't seem to really do the same characters over and over again or the same things over and over again. And when you said Jack Handey, man, deep thoughts from Jack Handey. I remember, you'd turn on Saturday Night Live and you just hope, I hope this episode has one, Oh man, yeah.
I'm lucky in so many ways. Things happen by accident. And another example is a next door neighbor and I have become friends. And we met by accident. We're living in the same neighborhood and we play tennis together. But he was a writer for Saturday Night Live. And now we're doing a piece together. And other people I ran into by accident include Alan Zibel. And we're to do something together. We keep talking about doing a project. I met Lorraine Newman not long ago, and she is the person I learned that Richard Belzer passed away. There's all these kind of connections keep happening. And I think when you meet some of these people, they all know each other. And then you get a chance to meet people who are very talented, but they all have one thing in common. They all are super nice. These are really, really great people. And I think that there's talented people out there that you and I would know, but we don't hear about them because they're not nice and nobody wants to work with them. And in this business, you have to work long hours, you have to be devoted, and you have to really put your shoulder to the wheel. And nobody wants to work with someone who's an asshole. And so that was one of the lessons.
So true. So true.
I find these people are amazingly nice. I've met the sweetest people. Michael Palin, for instance, we were just talking. I was letting him know that I had been talking to the Spam Museum. Spam Museum's going to be in my museum book. I didn't know there was a Spam Museum, but the Spam Museum's highlight is a recreation of the set of the Spam sketch from Monty Python.
Nice.
So I told Michael this, and I sent him a painting of the room, and he wrote me back. I didn't see it initially. I told him he must have went straight to the Spam folder. Which he got a great laugh. But then when he says to me, he goes, "Oh, I saw your piece here. It was very funny." I mean, my goodness, getting a compliment for someone like that, even if maybe he wasn't the greatest piece, but him just saying that because of the kindness of his heart, he's building me up and he's injecting encouragement to me. And I've learned that encouragement is so important. As I teach now in all these different schools I teach around the world, from NYU to South Korea, all different colleges. I always say encouragement. Even if a person's terrible, they're not going to get better without encouragement. So it's always good to say, oh, this is good. Let's look at the good thing about this. And now let's work from there. And so when I work with different things and collaborations, I never shoot down someone. I first say, oh, great. Let's see what we could do to improve it.
You're so right about support groups. It's when I started doing the podcast and even as a comedian, you start to realize that new tribe based around sort of whatever creative world you're in, those are the people that are going to be the most supportive. And you're also right, the ones that aren't are the assholes and who don't understand the concept that you need a support group.
Yeah, I owe you two apologies. One, I started going into, I don't even know how this happened, but I really went into teacher mode because we got talking about the nuts and bolts of comedy, and you could hear I'm passionate about it. I do enjoy this, and I teach classes on just humor. I had a chance to do the humor conference. They're starting to do a humor conference where they're teaching people to be funnier and stuff. And the other thing I have to apologize, all the name dropping is pretty.
No,
pretty
I love it. I love it.
It's pretty astounding. But those are my best stories. I mean, I always feel like insecure that nobody wants to hear stories about me. They want to hear stories about that happened to me with someone who other people are going to know. So I kind of go back.
Name drop all you want. I love it. My friends make fun of me when I have a friend, part of the support systems that we're talking about, Fred Carroll, very nice person and fellow podcaster. He would always tease me, and he made a sound bite. He's really good with sounds and adding music and effects. And he sends it to me. He actually sent it to my wife so she could, and it goes, Jeff Dwoskin name drop. And it's like this. What an asshole. No, it's just really funny. And so he, well, that's how you know when you're good friends, you can razz each other. That's the whole best.
Well, I have a podcast. So I feel like my guests, it's their responsibility to come to the show, to come to the game prepared and have a story or two. I had guests who just sit there and do nothing. But the guys who are a little more experienced, who have been on other shows, they know it's their responsibility to come on and deliver the goods. I want them to name drop and give me a Tom Hanks story. It's okay. I mean, I don't want to hear about how so many stories in the beginning, we all start off the same where we're all learning and stuff. So I'm a little self-conscious about hearing the same stories about. I doodled when I was a kid. I was always interested in art. I wanted exciting things like how I didn't finish high school. That's exciting.
That is exciting. Bob, was there somebody who, and when we talk about support groups early on, that gave you that encouragement that pushed you forever in this direction?
No, I hear this all the time from people that as they were growing up, their friends never said, "Oh, you're funny. You should get into this." That never happens. In my case, I was lucky I had a teacher in college at Pratt Institute, a writing teacher. She changed my whole career because we had this creative writing class that began every class with her reading without her telling the class who wrote it. She read a piece of mine each morning. And she didn't tell anybody who it was, but every morning she started with one of the homework assignments. And the class would laugh. And that was the most amazing encouragement. And I spent, after that, years trying to track her down to thank her in a way, just to make it clear how important you were to me. I finally did get a chance to find her and tell her how much she meant to me. And then I try to carry that over, those lessons, to when I teach, to make a difference with students.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to give you a second to think of someone that changed your life. And we're back with Bob Eckstein and some of the cool stuff he's done to help encourage others.
So when it comes to extra things, like just little things like writing letters of recommendation and things like that, I realize how important these little things are. And I take it really seriously. Even when I'm teaching class, I try to make the experience special. My classes at NYU, it's not unusual for all of a sudden to get a knock on the door and have someone deliver us like 6 pizza pies. Yeah, pick everyone's spirit up. Or another time say, we're going to meet at this class. And unbeknown to them, they show up and the class is at a comedy club in which I've arranged with the manager to make it non-alcoholic and allow everyone to get a front row seat at a real comedy club.
That's amazing.
And they'll not forget that. And then that stays with them. And it's always about them too. I try to give them the chance to say, who are you? Maybe you're in the wrong class. Well, let's find out why. Are you in the right class or in the wrong class? What's your voice? And we used to do different exercises like that to find that out. But all of these techniques and things like that come from teachers who first took me and had me have that experience myself and learn from it.
A lot of people I talk to have that one moment, that teacher, parent, somebody that did something. And the other important thing that you mentioned, which I always, anytime it comes up, I like to remind everyone, because I think it's a good reminder, is to do what Bob did. And if somebody did something in your life that made a difference, tell them.
Yeah, you got to be careful not to wait for it to be right next to you. I started going to therapy. That just happened. It was because I was having a hard time with some things that happened in my career. And I'm going to share this because I'm sure there's some people who are comedy geeks who will totally understand. And that is, around the time that Trump got elected, all these magazines, these humor magazines, all went under. I was the main guy at Spy Magazine. And then Mad Magazine folded, National Lampoon folded, Playboy folded. All these places went under. And I found myself all of a sudden on a raft somewhere. And I went to therapy. And we talked about who was the people who supported you and gave you encouragement. And I was asked if my parents did or my family. And they didn't. Then my therapist said, I want you to go back to your mom. And this is your homework. You're going to sit down with your mother, who's alive. My father passed away when he was young. And talk to your mom and ask her why she never encouraged me, why she never thought I should be in the field of comedy. And she said, well, because you were never funny. She goes, I would have been happy to give you that support if I thought you had an ounce of talent. But, I guess we just don't share the same sense of humor because I love you as a son, but I don't really get you. And this is similar to other experiences with other family members. I asked, I had gone to a cousin who did this professionally. And he says, I really highly recommend you give it up. So the lesson here is that you cannot put all your weight on your family. And I'm repeating this because there's this wonderful friend of mine, Jane Friedman, who teaches writers and publishers in the business of writing. I took a workshop, and one of the lessons she had was the exact same thing. And she had stories, everyone had similar stories where their mom or their brother and sister told them to give up. And she said to me, she goes, they're the last people who are going to read your book. Now, they love you, and they'll give you a 5-star review on Amazon, but they didn't read the book. And that's a lesson I've learned. And it's up to you. But I found my people who do give me that encouragement. And I don't even know if they think that my work is strong, but they do it because they love other comedians and other cartoonists. And they do it because they just support the art.
You bring up a lot of good points. And I think sometimes family can see us differently because I think sometimes we're different around our family than we are around other people.
Oh, yeah. The kitchen is the toughest room. When we had dinner, and I saw in the Richard Belzer had said that their kitchen was their toughest room. Their parents never encouraged them. And I hear that from so many other comedians.
Like my mom never got to see me do stand-up just because she passed away before, but my father was able to come see me do it, but at like the big comedy castle, right? And then he would like brag to his friends and bring all his friends to see me and stuff like that. But it was also, I don't think I would have ever gotten that from hanging out at dinner, right?
Yeah.
He was able to see me as what I call, and my brother calls, onstage Jeff, the different version of me that goes on stage in front of 500 people, fearless, right? And so, so that was, he was able to say, all right, I get it.
And did your dad like you because he was given the validation? They seeing your son make a room full of people happy.
He loved it. He had like a book club, and like I would be at this club like almost every March.
That's wonderful.
And he would bring everyone, it was, it was nice. It was nice. And, so I had that. But when you talk about like people reading your book and stuff, or your family just giving you 5 stars, but not really reading your book, I just gave someone this advice like a couple of days ago. They were trying to get some 5-star reviews on their Apple podcast because they needed it to get somewhere else, right? For some reason, it was a criteria to be something on it as a critic for something else. So I said to him, DM everyone individually. I go, no one is going to respond to your Facebook post. I go, I do it all the time. I was just up for this big Detroit magazine best of crickets. I have to send personal notes to everyone and then they'll do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But if I had posted, I won, then I would have had 500 likes.
Jeff, you find, do you ever give this any thought to your own, the way you frame your work, that you want to be confident but not cocky? And when you're boastful, you are at risk of losing some of your audience because people are turned off. They want to know that you're in good hands when you're on stage. They don't want to know that you are full of yourself. There's like a balance.
That is true. Comedy. You can go on forever on that one, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. I've made friends with Mark Schatz, and he wrote Comedy Writing Secrets. And he's all into this. I went to his workshops and he could pontificate for hours and talk about breaking it down and stuff. Yeah, it's an endless hole, which is good. I mean, I didn't mean to make it sound negative, but you're right. It's impossible to come to an end, to put a bow on it. You're always constantly turning into something else. There's another way of looking at it and to explore how it can be better or how it can be seen in a different way.
Totally. It's so interesting. Like I was telling someone, I got advice early on. He said to me, hey, Jeff, you need to pause more. I can't tell you where, but when you find the pauses, your online persona is going to just become amazing. And so eventually, like I did. You
found them.
I found them, became really good at it. And then I was telling someone, I go, interestingly enough, I figured out this one joke wasn't working because I was pausing. And then if I ran right through it, boom, 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 the rule of 3. But if I ran through all 3 without the pause, then they didn't have time to think about what I just said. And then they laugh because they shouldn't have laughed.
Oh, you mean they're laughing because they're nervous because they're not sure what was funny?
Well, because sometimes if you don't have time to think about it, they'll let, right? You can hear something and laugh, but then if you give them a pause and they realize, oh, wait a minute, Jeff was crossing a line there. That was a little inappropriate. I shouldn't laugh in public at that. But I found like, just like if I change the pace of it, I could get the laugh. And then I told someone, I said, like, if you ever see me, like, the look on my face is because that's the favorite moment of my show, when I have everyone laughing at this one thing where they absolutely should not be laughing. It was horrible what I just said, but I said it in such a way they didn't realize it. And then we moved on. Anyway, enough about me.
No, that's all good points, because if you don't pause, the audience feels like you're not in control.
Right.
Like you're rushing. You're talking. I feel a little uncomfortable because we've gone 5 minutes now without me name dropping. But there was another person who's super nice. Was Sarah Silverman had given me some advice on humor, and she says a few things she had said, and one of them was you have to embrace the silence. Because when you get to the point that you can embrace the silence, you kind of own the stage, and people feel like you have control of the time passing. I'm not a performer. I only teach, and I do the talking and stuff like that because it supports me and because I like sharing my secrets. By no means, I'm not a performer. I have to do it then on the page. But because I know so many comedians and they've shared their secrets, I feel like I do know stuff that I could, help. But by no means am I at your level. I do not go on the stage.
Sarah Silverman's absolutely 100% correct. I always joke, I go, comedy's 99% confidence. Right. And that's kind of like what, and then you have to have some good material to back it up, but it's all about confidence can make or break you. And that's kind of what she was saying. If you can stand there, if you say something and it doesn't get an immediate laugh and you just stop, like you don't go, right. Those.
Yeah.
The other thing, which I got advice once from from a comedian, Jim Wiggins, who got this advice from Phyllis Diller. So, 2 degrees from Phyllis. Anyway, but it was that you have to stare at the audience. You have to make eye contact. And if you look at them direct while you're saying something and you're controlling that silence and not losing yourself, then they'll laugh. And he used to tell me, he's like, Jeff, you may not get the laugh, but you'll get a laugh. And then that'll release other people's laughs. And to me, it's like, it's almost like a video game. If you watch when you're on stage doing your presentation, if you stare someone, talk to them directly in the eyes when you're doing a line, they'll laugh, and then that'll cause other people to laugh. But if you look above them, they can sense that. And it's like, and if you're connecting with someone in that front row, then the people in the back can feel that as well. So it's a fascinating thing. I love being on stage. I don't do it as much as I used to because of this podcast, but it is a fascinating.
Well, this is the stage.
Yes, it is.
This is the stage. When I first started out, there was a guy who was doing comedy who was a math teacher on the side. And I have to add that detail. He was a math teacher. And he said it's 90% delivery and attitude and 20% material.
Yeah, it's about right.
Which is really great because he said 90% and 20%. And that's 110%.
Right.
And he was a math teacher.
Right. But it is accurate regardless. Because it's comedy. So it doesn't really follow the exact rules. So. No, let's talk Snowman again for a few seconds and wrap it up because I want people to understand some of the cool stuff in there. And there was a lot of great stuff. I loved the whole, if you could spend a couple minutes talking about how the Snowman was used in advertising, selling booze, and then sort of worked its way into the whole advertising world as an icon. I found that just to be fascinating.
Yeah, you're talking about what was initially I called the Dean Martin years. And then I changed it to the W.C. Field years, in which the Snowman took on the persona of the biggest star at the time, W.C. Fields in the 1920s. And he became a very cheap and expensive way for advertisers in Madison Avenue to advertise things that were like cigarettes, anything to do with anything with white stuff, flour, the sugar. If they were selling cocaine, the Snowman would have been the spokesperson. There was all these different things that the Snowman was used as an icon. It's funny. He transformed into different things before he became known as a childlike activity. There was a time before the 1960s, the snowman making wasn't necessarily for kids. It was already associated with smoking and womanizing or whatever, all the things that people admired out of Dean Martin or W.C. Fields. People used to laugh at W.C. Fields being a total douche. He was mistreating people in his movies and everything, and that got big laughs, and that was accepted. Totally politically incorrect time in media. And then, of course, Frosty the Snowman came on the scene and ruined his whole everything. it was all of a sudden became frivolous and it became silly. But before that, the Snowman was something that was made by some of the greatest artists of our time, including Michelangelo and Larkin Mead, one of the most important American sculptors, made a snowman. So that's what I would try to uncover, is that things look differently on the surface. When I was doing the book from the very beginning, I used as a template Tim Burton's movie Batman. Came out the same time I started the movie. Batman, when it came out, everyone couldn't really get their hands around this idea that Batman now was going to be a serious, dark movie, because all we knew was the campy TV show. But what made it so fascinating was the miscasting, was turning it on its head. So I had that in mind, and I have it in mind when I do other things, where I take something that's an innocent symbol or something that we all take for granted and see if we could see another side of it. And what I did uncover was that the Snowman had a history of sex and violence. There's all these things like the miracle of 1511 and the massacre of 1690, these incidences in history that no one knew about that involved blood and sex and stuff like that, and snowmen.
It's fascinating. And then I encourage everyone to get the history of the Snowman. Because that's like 1/100th of the book right there.
Well, I would like to say get the illustrated history of the Snowman, because I took all the same material and I put all my personal money into the illustrated history of Snowman. So now you can see all the pictures and you can really enjoy the stories more, because it's full color in this beautiful coffee table book. And I know people really enjoy it. So there is the history of Snowman, but that's out of print and sold out. It's the illustrated history of the Snowman that's available now, that's more pretty, and it makes a nice gift. I made sure it's affordable. And if you know someone in your life who does not deserve an expensive Christmas gift or any type of gift, this is the gift to get them.
All right, well, get the illustrated history of the Snowman. And if you want the out-of-print history of the Snowman, I'm selling mine on eBay for $500. No, I'm just kidding. I will never let that go. I will never let it go. Awesome. This was so great hanging with you, Bob. Thank you so much for spending all this time with me.
No, thanks for putting up with me. I want to mention, if people want to, if they're not sick and they need to turn off the podcast by this time from me, I go on about talking about humor and talk about cartoons, and I answer your questions on my newsletter called The Bob on Substack, and I really enjoy it. It's free, and we go on about like how to be a better writer and how to be funnier, and it's not me giving the advice, but I have on all these people who really know their stuff as guests, and share their advice, and it's a lot of fun.
I'm a subscriber. I encourage everyone to subscribe. Then there's the Elements of Stress we talked about. Everyone's a Critic, the Ultimate Cartoon Book, Complete Book of Cat Names. And then what's your website? What's the website and where you hang out on social?
You could just go by my name on any of the social things, or you could go to my website, bobeckstein.com, and it's spelled BOBECKSTEIN. Yeah, you could see all my different artwork and projects. And I love hearing from people. I like helping people out when it comes to, like, they're doing a book and they're doing this and stuff. And, we share a lot of information, because I feel like information definitely is power, and people help me. I'm sure there's people out there right now listening to this who can help me, and I can learn from them too.
Let's all help each other. Big hug, big hug. Thank you.
Hug. Jeff, thanks so much.
All right, everyone, the amazing Bob Eckstein. If you love to laugh, definitely pick up one of his books. Links in the show notes. The Complete Book of Cat Names. Of course, the Illustrated History of the Snowman. The Elements of Stress. Everyone's a Critic. The Ultimate Cartoon Book. All great reads. And, of course, Bob's podcast, The Cartoon Pad. Plenty of opportunity to get Bob into your life. Well, with the interview over, and you're already probably off buying all his books, I guess episode 225 is officially at a close. One more huge thank you to Bob Eckstein, and one huge thank you to all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.